Hi everybody, it's Christina. Welcome back to Adventures in Polish Land. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I have noticed in my own reading over the course of the last year, and that is books that have an unnamed narrator or unnamed protagonist in general. I've been wondering if this is just a trend within my own reading or if it's a trend in the publishing industry at large. So what I've done is I've gone through the books that I've read over the course of the last year. I'm going to share with you all of my reads that had an unnamed narrator. Then I'm going to talk about an article that I found online that discusses this topic. And then at the end, I'm going to share my thoughts. So I have a little notebook here where I wrote down all my little cheat sheets. Let's start off with the books that I've read. This is from 2024 to present day. We're in February of 2025 as I'm filming this. And these are all of the books I'm going to share with you, the title, the author, and their publishing date. First up, we have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This was published in 1938. Then we have I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This was originally published in 1995. However, it was translated from the French into English in 2022. Then we have No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. This was published in 2021. We have Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. This was published in 2023. Then is The Ministry of Time by Killian Bradley, published in 2024. And The City and Its Uncertain Walls by Haruki Murakami. This was published in 2023 and then translated from the Japanese into English in 2024. Of these 6 books, 4 of them were published within the last few years. Daphne du Maurier's book is obviously more of a modern classic, and then we have I Who Have Never Known Men, who, although originally published about 30 years ago now, it was recently translated, and I think that speaks for itself. If I look at just 2024 in general, books with an unnamed narrator made up over 11% of my total reading for the year, which is a decent slice of my reading pie. So I wanted to find out why that is, because all of these books I picked up because I heard somebody else talk about them, or for Patricia Lockwood's book, I picked it up based on the author because she's one of my favorite authors. But otherwise, I wasn't really paying attention to whether my reads had an unnamed narrator. It just so happened to be that way. So I did a little bit of research, went to Google, typed in unnamed narrators, trends, and I found an article published in March of 2015 by Sam Sachs, writing for The New Yorker, and it's called The Rise of the Nameless Narrator. And I'm going to leave a link to the article in the description box. I recommend reading it in full because it's quite interesting, but right away, as soon as I started reading this article, I thought, no wonder I'm reading so many books with unnamed narrators, because they seem to fall into genres that appeal to me. So he first mentions in the article that we see unnamed narrators in dystopian stories because names disappear in totalitarian regimes. And we can certainly see that because in a dystopian world, people are stripped of their freedoms and their individuality and their sense of self. So a name is easy to take away from that. And I would definitely say that both I Who Have Never Known Men and Land of Milk and Honey are dystopians, so those fall into that camp. Next up, he mentions how this technique is used by modern writers to set tales out of time. I immediately thought of The City and Its Uncertain Walls by Haruki Murakami for this. There's a clock on the front of the book that has no hands, and that element of time really plays a key role in that novel. So that was an interesting take. He also mentions that we see unnamed narrators in auto-fictional novels because it helps to blend what is fiction from what is memoir. And No One Is Talking About This is an auto-fictional novel, and this is actually the first novel where I noticed my reading had an unnamed narrator. In this novel, she doesn't use her own name, and she also doesn't name other characters, which I thought was really important because if you've read this book, you know it talks on really deep and challenging topics in this author's real life in a fictionalized way. But I think it would have done a disservice to her real family members to give them fictionalized names. So I can definitely see why she left her characters unnamed in this book. Going back to the New Yorker article, A few other points that I really enjoyed was he talked about stories about wandering having unnamed narrators, because when you don't have a proper home, you might not have a proper name. And similarly, he discusses how having an unnamed narrator blurs lines between what's real and what's not. So although this article was published 10 years ago now, I think it's still really relevant. Almost none of the books that I talked about today were published at the time this article was written, and it's really interesting that a lot of the elements that he mentions as fitting these types of stories still rings through 10 years later, and we're seeing them in new releases. Now I thought I would share a bit of my thoughts, and the first thing that popped into my head was, does it matter? Does it really matter if our narrators are named or not in books? I think the main reason I had that thought is because I am terrible at remembering character names. Even in some of my favorite books of all time, I can't tell you what the characters were named. Even yesterday, while I was preparing for this video, I was thinking about some of my all-time favorite books. I can't tell you the characters' names in those books, but what I can tell you is a brief synopsis of the story, but also what I learned from the story and how it made me feel, and why it's an important book for me even all these years later when I might not remember all the little details. And although I think names in real life are very important and give people identity, I don't necessarily read a book to meet new people or meet characters. I read a book to learn something about the world and other cultures and other people and experiences that they have. And down the road, I'm not going to necessarily care what the character's name was. I'm going to care what that book taught me and what I bring with it throughout the rest of my life. So, am I searching out books on purpose that have unnamed narrators? No, but I think it is very interesting for me to see this trend in my reading and draw connections between books that are dystopian in nature, which is my favorite genre. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. If you've read a book with an unnamed narrator that you really enjoyed, please share what that book is. And conversely, if you don't like this trend at all and you like to have characters that are more defined and named, I would love to know. I hope you found this video interesting. If there are other topics you want to discuss, let me know that in the comments as well, and I will see you next time for a reading update. Bye!